Today I'm going to show you how I dialed in Steve Vai's tone from the David Lee Roth album Skyscraper. So break out your Ibanez guitars and let's get going. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. There is a tone that I have been chasing for a few weeks now. It is Steve Vai's Jose Modded Marshall tone from that amazing David Lee Roth album Skyscraper, and particularly the song Knucklebones, which is why I actually called my preset J Vai Knucklebones. Yeah, very imaginative, I know. Hey, this has been a real quest for me because, look, we all love Marshall amps. What do we love more than Marshall amps? Modded Marshall amps, especially Jose Modded Marshall amps. Now I know there are a couple within the Fractalverse already, like the Atomica and the Cameron amps, but I wanted to do it to a real 1959 Plexi model within the Fractalverse. So I actually started with that as a base, and then using my knowledge of building amps and modifying amps, I actually added elements to recreate that whole Jose Modded Marshall tone. And it was epic. I loved doing it. Before I show you an axe edit, I want to give a quick shout out to Perfecto de Castro, who was really helpful in dialing in this tone. He was full of advice, especially on the cab sound that I should use for this. So thank you, Perfecto. I really appreciate all the help. Alrighty, let's head over to Axe Edit and I'll show you exactly how I did this. And make sure you stick around to the end because I've done a track which is very, very Steve Vai inspired, very, very Knucklebones. Yeah, my own version of Knucklebones, complete with an epic, epic solo. But first, let's get going and let me show you how I dial this in. All right, I have my JP Vai Knucklebones preset all loaded up into Axe Edit here. Let's take a listen first and then I will walk you through it. Wow, what an amazing sound. I love it. I have been using this preset quite a lot recently. Not with the dimension chorus on all the time, but you've heard it on the channel before. You just didn't know. Now you're going to get to see how I actually dialed this in. Now you'll see that my preset actually says no cab, and the reason it says no cab is I am using a third-party cab at the moment. I'm using Torpedo Wall of Sound by 2 Notes. Shout out to 2 Notes as well. They make some amazing stuff. The reason I used this cab here, which is the BHG Alien White 86 cab, this is a capture of Steve Vai's actual cabinet from that era. Yep, it is the actual cabinet which he toured with. The cab was actually auctioned off a few years ago and it was bought by Michael Nielsen. Hence it says BHG, Big Hairy Guitars. Michael Nielsen. Yeah. And then 2 Notes did a capture of this cab and also the cab with some different speakers in it as well. This cab was actually loaded up with Celestion Vintage 30 speakers. And during this period of time, Marshall were also loading up these speaker cabs with the Celestion G12H 30-watt speaker as well. Now, in the preset, I actually did dial in a cab sound as well, which I'll walk you through a little bit later. All right, let's have a walkthrough of this preset. So I'm coming into the input. I've got a little bit of the threshold on the gate going in because my guitar is a little bit noisy. Yeah, as you can hear, there's a grounding issue with it. I don't know. I'll sort it out at some stage. Then I have a couple of drive pedals. The first drive pedal I'll talk about a little bit more when I show you the lead tones that I dialed in. And then the second drive pedal, that's actually the beginning of the Jose mods. But let me show you the amp first. So I picked the 1959 SLP treble channel, and in the tone you can see that I've got the gain dialed in at 7, which is a little bit less than I'd usually use. Usually I would dime it, but there's a reason I didn't. And then I have all the rest of the dials at 10, including the master. If we go to ideal, you can see that the master is at 10 as well. Now, why do I have the gain at 7? Well, because here on this second drive pedal, this is actually a tube drive pedal. And what it's doing is emulating the additional tube gain stage which Jose Arredondo added to Marshall Plexi amps. So it was an extra 12X7 tube. Now we obviously can't do that within the block because there's nowhere to actually add an extra gain stage, but we can do that with a tube drive pedal. And I actually do this with my actual 50-watt Plexi. I have a Blackstar Depth 10 pedal, which is a tube drive pedal, and I put it in front of that amplifier and it does the same thing. When you look at the schematic, essentially all Jose did was after the input, he put a gain stage and then it went into the first regular gain stage on a Marshall Plexi. So putting it before the input jack does the same thing. And trust me, it works. I've done it with my real amp. Alrighty, so that's what's feeding into this amplifier. Now, I've only got a little bit of drive going on here. It's only 1.15 and the level is at 3.7. Didn't want too much push in there because there are additional gain stages within the amplifier. But let's have a listen to the amp without the pedal first, and then I'll add it in and you can see how much extra saturation it's adding into it. I'll also turn off the chorus and the delay so that you can really hear what the amp is doing. So here it is without that extra drive pedal. If we add that back in, so just adding a little bit of push, but also it's shaping the tone a little bit. It's rolling off a little bit of the bass, and you can hear the mids and the treble a little bit more. Now I've left the tone at 5 here. I haven't actually cut it or added anything to it, but it is having an effect on the overall sound of the amp. I really like what it does. It tightens up the amp a little bit. All right, when we go over to the amp block, like I said, you can see that the dials are like this. The gain's at 7, everything else is at 10. Now this is where all the modding, I say modding, the virtual modding took place. So I went over to the preamp section, and one of the other mods that Jose did was to add clipping diodes to the Plexi amps so that there was even more gain. Yes, we had the extra gain stage in front, and then we had the clipping diodes, usually Zener diodes. And what it did was it added a little bit more overdrive and a little bit more compression to the overall amp. I've actually done this to my Plexi as well. And it's great. When you flick the switch on, it's like having a boost pedal in front of the amp. It's fantastic. So what I did was I went over to the saturation section here and I put it on the on position and I dialed it into about 3.5. Now I'll take this off for a second so that you can hear it without it. Then we'll add it back in and we'll see what difference it makes. So here it is without the saturation switch. If we turn it on, so you can probably hear that there's even more push now that I've got the saturation switch in there. If I take off both the saturation switch and the extra gain stage, then you'll see how much gain the stock amp has. So here's the stock amp without the extra gain stage and the saturation switch. Still a great sounding amp, but when we add the others in, and let's turn on the saturation switch as well. We've got a little bit extra going on in there. And that's what the mods did. It's incredible what a difference it makes. That was the magic of the Jose Modded Marshalls. And recreating it here, man, it's been so much fun. Anyways, I did a couple more things in here. Now, I changed the preamp tubes to the 12X7A SYL. This is the Sylvania tubes. I actually have some of these in some of my amps in the studio, and they sound absolutely amazing. I have old ones from like the 1970s and 1980s. The stock tube is the ECC 83. And what the Sylvania tubes do is give a little bit more brightness, and they roll off a little bit more of the low end. I just like the way the tubes sound, so I usually change them over to this in my presets. Now the saturation switch, we actually have 3 positions. We have off, on, and on ideal. The reason why we have that is because usually when you use a clipping diode circuit like this in an amp, when you switch it on, the compression actually lowers the output volume of the amplifier. And on ideal, it basically retains that unity volume there. Okay, after that, what I did was I went over to the Tonestack and I made a change here. Now this made the biggest tonal difference in one move. What I did was put the Tonestack at the end of the chain. You see, when Jose added a master volume to the Plexi amps, he actually did it pre-Tonestack. And it had an effect on the overall tone of the amp. What it did was it scooped out a little bit of the mids, and it increased the bass, and it increased the brightness just a little bit, but without the harshness and stuff like that. So what I did was I actually changed it from post to end, and I actually played around with all of these in order to see which one would actually give me the tone that I was looking for. So if I put it back to the stock position, which is post, you'll hear that the tone of the amp actually changes. The character of the amp actually changes. So you can probably hear there's more mid-range in there, there's more low end in there as well. Now when I put it at the end, this is what happens. That's really cool, isn't it? It's kind of like taking a blanket off the speaker cab. There's more brightness in there, there's more clarity in there. Now you can actually go through all of these and see what difference it makes. This is a really good move if you want to revoice your amp model within the Fractalverse. So let's check them out. Let's go to pre-mid. Very, very mid heavy. And then pre. That sounds pretty cool. Then post is the stock Plexi setting. Again, the mid-range is changing there. Then we go to mid. That's adding more mid-range again, and the low end is coming through really strong. And then we go to the end again. That's pretty cool. That's the closest. That's what I was looking for. I was looking for that slightly scooped sound, and also the bass to increase, a little bit more brightness in the high end as well. Once I had the Tonestack dialed in the correct position, what I did was I went over to the power amp section and I actually dialed in the bias grid a little bit more. I always put it on 70%. I like the sound of it there. The feel of it is a little bit more aggressive. It's a little bit more in your face and punchy. So it's usually about, I think about 42 or 45%. We'll put it on 45 and then you can have a listen, and then I'll put it on 70. You can see what difference it makes. It's still a great sound, but at 70%, it's a little bit more something there. Check this out. More is more. And we like that, right? I love the way that sounds. Right, I didn't change anything on the power supply. I did change stuff on the speaker, but we'll check that out later when we check out the cab section. And then in the dynamic section, I dialed the input dynamics up to 5. I like the way it feels with the expansion of the input dynamics to 5 there. I do it on all of my presets, so that's something you can check out as well. And those are the mods that I did in order to recreate that Steve Vai Jose Modded Marshall from that era tone. Such a lovely tone to play. I've actually used it on videos you probably haven't even realized, but it's such an epic tone to play, and it responds to the volume control really well. This guitar actually has a Damasio PAF Pro in it, which isn't the highest output pickup out there. It's quite moderate output pickup, and it just does wonders when I actually turn the volume down. Lovely, lovely dynamic sound. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, do me a huge favor and smash that subscribe button and hit the bell notification, because more Fractal tutorials will be coming along. I also have a playlist where you can check out all of my previous Fractal tutorials, so please do check that out. Thanks so much. Let's get back to this tone. All right, the rest of the chain is pretty simple. I have a cab block in there, which I'll walk you through in just a second. I have an enhancer, which I actually used to stereoize the sound. So without it, and if we add that in, I love what that does. I usually use it on clean sounds because then I can do a single take on a clean sound and it basically stereoizes it, takes the guitars out of the center, puts them on the side. Love it. All right, after that, I have a chorus, a delay, and a reverb. I'm going to turn them all on at the moment. The reason I added the chorus, and it's a dimension chorus, it's the dimension 1, because on the beginning of the song Knucklebones, Steve Vai actually has a chorus going on. Yeah, for that intro. So if I play the intro of Knucklebones itself, instead of my version of it. Probably sounds quite familiar, right? So I wanted to put that in there because it's a lovely, lovely, lovely tone. After that, I've got a delay. I used the dual delay and I actually have an SD3000 tone dialed in. It's in my library. This is the one I always default to. Love the sound of this one. On one side, I've got 375 milliseconds. On the other side is 750 milliseconds. And the mix is 10.5 on the rhythm tones here. And then for the reverb, I used the Sun plate, which is the Sunset Sound plate reverb. It's just a really nice sounding reverb. I loved the sound of this one. So this is at 10% as well. So not too much reverb going on there. Let's have a look at this drive pedal. I've got this dialed in on scene number 3 here, and I've got my lead tone here. Now, one of the pedals which Steve Vai was known to use back in the day, and probably still does, is the Boss DS1. So I dialed in the DS1 distortion mod in order to get my lead tone here. Now I did adjust the delay and the reverb a little bit as well. Actually, the reverb stayed the same, but the delay changed to just another channel. It's exactly the same delay, but it's dialed up to 17% here because lead sound need a little bit more delay in there. When I add this in, it gives me that extra push that I like to have when I play my lead parts. And without it, there's still plenty of gain there without the pedal, but I love the extra push that this gives when I have it engaged. And I've got the distortion dialed in at 4.25, the tone is at about 3.5, and the level is just under 7 here. And that gives me that extra sustain, that extra kind of ability to pinch harmonic easily. Yeah, let's call it that, the pinch harmonic pedal. And what I love most about this lead tone, it does that really smooth Steve Vai thing. You kind of know what I mean, right? You've got to love it. It does that whole for the love of God thing. I'm so glad I dialed in this. And it's that DS1 which gives that extra push, that extra smoothness. And what a lovely tone to play with. I really, really do enjoy playing this lead tone. So like I said, I did add a cab into here. So let's switch off the 2 notes cab and have a listen to the cab that I dialed in here. So I'll play a little bit first and then we'll go through it. I think I got pretty close. Now this was a little bit of a challenge because although I picked the Dyna cabs and the 412 1960 TV cab, which is a Marshall cab, this cab model is actually loaded up with greenback speakers. Now Steve Vai's cab actually had vintage 30 speakers in it. And during that period of time, there was also the G12H 30-watt speaker. So it was a different speaker and it has a different response and it has a mid bump in it, which the stock cab doesn't quite do. It actually sounds a little bit different. Now, I basically just did my microphones as I usually do. I have my dynamic mic 1 and the ribbon mic, and I used a high cut on the ribbon mic so that there wasn't too much treble frequency coming through. But then what I did was I actually went over to the amp block and I went over to speaker section. Now within this we have our speaker impedance curve, and changing this can change the response of the cab. So it's the interaction between the amplifier and the actual cab. Now this isn't the stock impedance curve of a 412 Marshall basket weave cab. No, let me show you what a regular impedance curve looks like. Yeah, this is the stock amp and the stock impedance curve on channel A here. I'm using channel B for this preset. You can see that it's quite different. It's profoundly different. Now what I did was I played around with the low frequency resonance and also the Q there, and the same thing on the high frequencies. And I changed the high frequency slope on here. What I was trying to do was get that mid-range into there. You see, when I play the stock cab, you'll hear that it does sound different and it takes away a little bit of that mid-range. So I'll play the riff. So that's the stock impedance curve. When I go over to channel B here, which is my custom impedance curve, which I dialed in by ear, you can hear the difference, right? I'll do that one more time. I'll just go between the two and then you can have a listen to the difference. So let's start with the stock. That was the magic formula for me. Made such a big difference to the overall sound of the cab. That's something that I really needed to do in order to capture the vibe of the 2 notes cab and Steve Vai's actual cab with the different speakers in there. One of the other things that I did was I turned up the speaker drive and the compression as well, and played around with the compliance and the speaker thump also in order to revoice the cab the way I wanted it to sound. And that's how I recreated a Jose Arredondo modded Marshall Plexi within the Fractalverse, but my way. And to sound like Knucklebones, hopefully. You guys can tell me in the comments whether it actually achieved the goal of sounding like the album. I think it did, got pretty close. I've definitely got the vibe there. That was the main thing for me. I wanted to capture that vibe of the amplifier. It's such a revered amplifier. You know, it's the ultimate Marshall. It's the ultimate expression of a Marshall amp, right? So having it within a preset within my Fractal now, I can use it anytime. And like I said, I have actually used it on another video. You have heard it on the channel and it sounded epic when I did that track. I really, really enjoy using this preset. Man, I haven't had this much fun in dialing in a tone for some time now. This was a pretty epic undertaking, but I'm so glad I did it because I now have that sound within my Fractal units and I can use it anytime. And trust me, I'm going to be using it all the time. I love the way this sounds and it feels under my fingers. It's that tone. And you know, if I want to change the cab, I can, but I love the sound of that cab and the Knucklebones thing going on. You know, Steve Vai had such an epic sound on those David Lee Roth albums, and it was really, really fun to actually dial in all of those tones. The preset is available on my Gumroad page. There are two different presets. There's one which will work on the Axe-Fx III, the FM9 Turbo and the FM3 Turbo. I have tested it on my units and it worked absolutely fine on all three. And then there is another version, a special version, which I did for the AM4 as well. So do check that out if you would like to have a play with this preset. Alrighty guys and girls, this was such a blast to do. If you enjoyed this one, you know the drill. Subscribe to the channel, give it a like, give it a hype. Also, please leave a comment and let me know what you thought of the tones. I would love to hear from you. Okay, it's time for the track. I had fun doing this one. This is my own version of Knucklebones. Yeah, this was cool to do, man. The solo is totally epic. Trust me, stick around for that. All right, have a great day and I shall see you soon with another one. Bye for now.